about Welsh and Associates and your vision for this session while Stephen and Nolan are signing in.
Yeah, because when they get in, we can just take off and get things going. Yes. And Sarah, I see your comment in the chat. Yes, good things are worth waiting for. Let me tell you,
Thank you, Sarah.
Righto. I mean, you are not going to be disappointed with Nolan and Stephen when they get here. Yeah, as the warm-up act, it's a little intimidating, let me tell you, because they have a lot of great stuff to share. So I think most of us on the call probably know each other, but some of you may not know me, but Sherry Welsh, Welsh and Associates. We have an executive search and professional recruiting services firm in beautiful downtown Kalamazoo. And I was fortunate enough to be a member attending the Civility Project webinar with another organization I belong to. And I was blown away by the information. I came back to friends and colleagues in Kalamazoo and I said, have you ever heard of this? And every person that I asked said, I don't know anything about that. What are you talking about? Whoa, blew my mind. Because I feel like in this time when tensions are high, you name the topic, you name the political viewpoint, you name the issue, people are edgy. And it swings all the way from people that are shouting and screaming to be heard to people that have completely shut down and don't want to even use their voice because they're afraid of repercussions.
And Sherry, you have arrived, just so you know.
Awesome, awesome.
Sorry about that. We had some technical issues, but we're here now.
No worries. Sorry about that, Nolan and Stephen. I will get to the bottom of it before the next time, I promise. So.
No problem.
So I guess we'd like to start today by thanking Sherry Welsh for hosting this session.
Yes.
And so I'd like to just give Sherry a moment to talk about why she wanted to bring the Civility Project to West Michigan in this format, and thank everybody for being here. I'm just going to tell you guys a few housekeeping things, and then Sherry will kick us off. We'll have a little video from our sponsor, Delta Dental, and then we'll jump into the program. So please mute your microphone, and you can use the chat to ask questions throughout the session, and I'll monitor that and make sure that Nolan and Stephen do know your questions and can answer them. And so we'll begin with Sherry, and then we'll jump to a quick little sponsor video.
Great, great. So like I was saying a minute ago, thrilled to be able to have you all on the webinar today and to learn from these terrific celebrated journalists, great communicators, who you'll be able to learn from their story. I hope that the takeaway for all of us today is that this may spur some, at a real grassroots level, spur the ability for us to model having crucial conversations, important conversations with our friends and coworkers and others in our community with civility. Because I think we're all on this call because we care about that. And so we have an opportunity to be leaders and model this behavior in our community so they can really get things done. I mean, I think you get what you focus on, right? And if we only focus on what makes us different and divide us, we'll never be able to solve the issues that as human beings we really care deeply about. So I'm just really thrilled to bring Stephen and Nolan's perspectives and their examples from their friendship and their years of working together to all of you. And with that, I'm going to let you experts take it away. Thank you so much.
Sherry.
Thanks for the kind words, Sherry. And thanks for putting together such a big group. We appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome group today. So thank you all for being here, and thanks to Sherry's team for a little shout out on Fox 17 this morning about the Civility Project. And I just want to thank our sponsors, Delta Dental, that make this possible. So we're coming to you free of charge, and to anybody who wants to host the program. So if you like what you experienced today, please give me a shout. You can put it in the chat, or you can email me as well, and I'll put my email in the chat in a moment, and we can bring the Civility Project to your workplace, your community, your group. So first, I'd like to start with a little sponsor video just to say thank you to Delta Dental, and then we will jump into the program.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
All right, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stephen Henderson and Nolan Finley. And if you guys could start us off by explaining what the Civility Project is and how you came to do this.
Nolan, you want to start?
I can, yeah. I mean, Steve and I have been evolving toward this project for almost from the moment we met, which was, a long time ago now, a decade or more now, when Steve came on as editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press, a liberal newspaper, and I was, and still am, editorial page editor of the Detroit News, a conservative paper. And of course, we had the opportunity in those roles. People like to put us together and see how much we'd fight. It was very entertaining to have us on television and radio, but we learned throughout that process that we sort of enjoyed the experience. We enjoyed the argument, the exchange of ideas, the conversation, and we became very good friends because of it, which puzzled a whole lot of people who, in this world today, we have a tendency to bunker up, to only socialize and have friends and meaningful relationship with people who share our political beliefs. And we came to understand that people are much more than their political beliefs. They're made up of a lot of different things. And we started putting together groups of people together in our bourbon nights, where we'd invite folks from all across the political spectrum and from different walks of life, different professions, and put them together in a room and pour some bourbon and let them talk and get to know each other in a safe space and understand that, there is value in making relationships across the political divide. And, I'll let Steve talk to you a little bit about the StoryCorps project we participated in at his initiation.
Yeah. So Nolan and I had been friends for a while, 7 or 8 years, in fact, when StoryCorps, which is an NPR program that travels the country asking people to tell important stories about themselves with other important people in their lives. And usually they get people who are family members or married. When they came to Detroit, said I wanted to take Nolan with me down to StoryCorps and have us tell our story. And the reason I did that was I wanted to capture the process that he and I had sort of gone through to become friends despite our political differences. And I wanted us to talk about where our beliefs came from. I wanted us to go and not have the normal argument that we have about politics or elections or things like that. I wanted us to explain to each other why we think the things that we do. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I think that has a lot to do with the reason that we're able to get along, is that we think of each other as more than the sum of our politics, right? Yes, I am a really liberal, progressive person with a lot of very strong opinions about the things that go on. And yes, Nolan is a very conservative guy with equally strong opinions, but it doesn't sum us up. It doesn't define us completely, and it doesn't really define the relationship that we have. And so I wanted us to sort of explore that a little more deeply in a way that would help us understand more about each other, help us understand where we're coming from. And when we did that, I think both of us learned some things about the other that we didn't know before, and had a greater appreciation for each other. But I think we also felt like we were onto something, that if we could share that experience with other people, get other people to do the same thing, we would move the needle a bit in terms of people's ability to have conversations about difficult issues or things they disagree about without demonizing each other, without it resorting to the kind of rancor or antipathy that we see all the time right now on places like social media. And so that was sort of the genesis, really, of the idea of this being a project, of us trying to share what has worked for us with other people, with the hope that that it will encourage them and make it possible for them, really, to do the same, to be able to have an argument, to have a disagreement about things, but not have it define the interactions with another person. That there is more to the relationship than just the difference in politics.
So thank
And
you.
so we came up with this exercise where we encourage people to do just what we do when we speak to groups. And we were doing this more when we spoke to groups in person. But pair off with somebody who you wouldn't otherwise think you'd have anything in common with or any interest in talking to, and get to know, before you ever discuss politics, get to know that person's background, that person's values and beliefs. Because our premise and the basic premise of this project is that most people come to their opinions the same way. They take the facts, they take the information, they apply their own values and experiences to it and come up with an opinion. And that explains the differences in opinions. And because you come up with a different opinion than someone else, or someone comes up with a different opinion than you, doesn't make them stupid, evil. It doesn't make them sinister, someone you need to be afraid of. They're just coming from different places. And that's true even among family members. You wouldn't think everybody shared the same values and experiences. Not necessarily true. And we urge people to figure out what those baseline values and experiences are, so that you don't dehumanize someone for their opinions. And I think that's the great danger here, and where we're at in our society today, where people are starting to dehumanize the folks who disagree with them, whether it's on the right or the left, that these folks who hold a different opinion are less than them and have no value. And we've seen throughout history the danger of dehumanization. And so I guess that's the macro goal here, is to get people to step back from that line and actually talk to each other.
So that's a great introduction. And in a few minutes, we're going to talk about some steps that all of us can take to build civility. But as we're like staring down the nose at an election coming up in a few weeks, I thought maybe we could jump in there. I know that that's on everybody's radar. And it's interesting, the other day, my 17-year-old daughter said to my mother, we need to have 3 political parties because there's just too much division, because she has no history of politics beyond today. And my mother said, what?
I don't think she's wrong.
Right. And my mom said, well, in history, you could still be friends with people who had different beliefs, and today it doesn't seem like you can. And so maybe we start with politics and talk about, how are we here and how can we do something about it by building civility? So maybe we start with that.
Well, I'll start, Steve. I think we're at a place in our political history where partisanship is far more important than principles. Within these two parties, even in my lifetime, within these two parties, you had conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans, and vice versa. You don't have that today. We have a like-mindedness amongst everyone within a party. And the parties are designed to force that like-mindedness. Dissent is not tolerated. If you have somebody, for example, like a Fred Upton, who in your area, who chooses to remain moderate and try to build bipartisan relationships, his party goes nuts, throws a primary, refuses to support him. And that's the threat and the risk to anyone in either party who tries to work across party lines, who tries to put principles ahead of partisanship. It's a system, designed to reward party loyalty rather than service to constituents.
So, I always think that our politics are reflections of our culture, right?
Mm.
That politicians behave in ways that they believe will get the right response from their voters. And Nolan's right about the sort of sad state of bipartisanship, but I think that comes from us, and it does not come from the political parties or from elected officials. And if you think about the ways we interact with each other right now, there are a lot of things that encourage that kind of intolerance. I am big on the idea that social media, for all its wonderful, for all its wonderful attributes in terms of connectivity and accessibility and things that we're able to do that we just couldn't imagine a couple of years ago, it really does reward stridency. It rewards intolerance. It rewards the idea of closing yourself off as much as it does opening yourself up, right? You have your set of friends and your community on social media, and you try to keep everybody else out. Or if somebody says something to you on social media you don't like, you block them, right? I think this is one of the most destructive features in our culture, this idea that I am going to shut you out completely from interacting with me because I don't like something that you said. Our politics is sort of mirroring that and telling us more about us, I think, than it is about our politicians. We have reached a point as a people where we just don't want to have that exchange anymore. We don't want to let other ideas than our own into our space. Now, I think there are a lot of reasons for that actually don't have to do with culture. They have to do with economics. They have to do with change. The massive demographic change that's taking place in this country has a lot of people much more fearful than they used to be. Those are drivers of all of those dynamics. But some of what we are talking about in the Civility Project really is pushing beyond that. It's not saying that those things don't matter. It's not saying that we shouldn't even acknowledge those things. It's saying we can go further than those kinds of surface interactions. And if you do, there's a great reward on the other end. There is the idea that A, you can have a relationship with somebody that you don't agree with on a lot of things, but B, you can learn a lot about your own positions and your own thoughts and your own beliefs by being exposed to other points of view and not feeling threatened by that difference. I think in so many cases, people close themselves off because they do feel threatened. They feel like the other ideas are a threat to them, and they feel threatened in the sense that their own ideas somehow will be attacked or degraded. It's the relationships that you can form beyond politics that make that less of a presence.
And I'll add to that social media is the seventh circle of hell, and cable TV is just one circle above it. Both of those, social media in particular, think about who gets the most followers on platforms like Facebook, Twitter, you name it. The people who are the most outrageous, the most abusive, who say the most uncivil things. Think about we're not rewarding in those platforms people who bring reasonable conversations and civil thought to the table. You look at cable TV, it grew up on this idea of presenting news from viewpoints that validate your beliefs. So we used to come to news way back when with an idea that we were going to see the stories and hear the facts and make our own opinions. Now the news starts with opinion. and people go to places like MSNBC and Fox to have their opinions validated, not to be informed. And so that further divides us, further separates us into camps. And, we are struggling against this idea every day that there's a profit in incivility, both in politics and in media and in social media.
So we definitely understand the problem. And I think the next question will be, how do we build civility? Before you guys jump in, I just want to encourage everybody in our audience to put your questions in the chat, and we will ask them as they arise. We want this to be interactive and have the conversation go two ways. But can you guys give us some steps that people can take toward building civility in their own relationships or workplaces or families even?
I think the imperative to do it is the thing that strikes me, right? The inability to be able to have these exchanges is killing our democracy. And I know that sounds harrowing and maybe outsized, but I really do think that there is a danger to self-governance, which is the idea of this country, posed by the inability of people to get along with the people that they see all the time and deal with all the time. And when we talk about civility, when Nolan and I talk about civility, that is what we're talking about. There are a lot of things that are out of our control right now in terms of how things work and how people relate to each other. You watch cable news or you on social media, you see these people who you don't even know, let alone have any control over, dragging things to this really low point. We're talking about the opportunity in each of your lives to be able to do it differently, and to do it differently with the people that you know, with the people who are closest to you, people who live in your community, people who are in your family, the people that you work with, the opportunity to kind of reframe those relationships around things that are not just about differences is what we're really focused on. And each of us has control over that in a way that we don't over these larger trends in our culture. Each of us can find somebody who we know who doesn't agree with us. All of us, I believe, have these folks in our families. Black, white, whatever you are, there's somebody in your family who does not agree with you, who you think is out of their minds or it seems nuts. The opportunity to try to push through that difference to a wider context and to be able to respect the differences come from a place of importance and credibility rather than some sort of animosity is what we're really trying to get people to realize and take advantage of.
Yeah, and understanding the value here and what you get out of it. We're not saying civility doesn't mean you have to change anything about yourself, your personality. It doesn't mean you have to suddenly become a nice, soft-spoken person. Neither Steve and I would fall into that category. I think we get after it, and we get angry and we get passionate. It's this idea that you see the value in a conversation across the divide. And I've learned that early on that, in talking to Steve, if I drop this conviction I have that I'm always right and enter a conversation thinking I might learn something, if I listen and if I honestly weigh and assess his ideas and the things he's bringing to the table, that I come away better off. I may still believe the same things I believed going in, but have a better understanding of why other people believe what they do. It helps me sharpen my point of view and, be perhaps a little bit less obnoxious about my point of view, understanding that there are legitimate reasons to think differently.
So I think the key here that you're saying is to listen and to consider what the other person is saying. And I think a lot of us think that we're listening, but I know that probably we could do a better job. So what tips do you have for people about how to actually listen toward building understanding? What can we do with that?
Yeah, so we talk about listening a lot in the Civility Project, and when we use that word, we're saying something a little different, I think, than most people think of when they hear that word. I think for a lot of us, the idea of listening just means that we're not talking, right? If I'm not talking, I must be listening to the person who is. But I think for a lot of us, that's actually not always the case. A lot of times when someone else is talking, we are in our own heads thinking about what we're going to say next when that person stops talking, or we're assessing what that person is saying with some sort of judgment. I think the idea of this kind of active listening, where you really are trying to not just understand where the other person is coming from and what they're trying to say, but really understand why they believe the thing that they're saying, and thinking maybe of questions to ask that person when they stop talking about why they believe the thing that they just said. It's a different kind of skill than I think a lot of us are accustomed to using in these kinds of exchanges. One of the other real principles that Nolan and I talk about is also the idea of never walking away from an argument or a discussion for good. Nolan and I can get into it about a lot of things. We do it on television or on radio a lot. And we have some pretty bitter disagreements sometimes. And sometimes it goes beyond just passionate, and there's other emotions that get involved. But at the end of the day, I don't think either of us has ever gotten up and said, well, that's it. I'm really done with this guy. I am not going to interact with him anymore. I'm not going to have this discussion again. That commitment to say, I'll be back and we can talk more is really important. And it is one of the things that says, it signals to the other person that you haven't judged them for the things that they've said or believe. And it also says that you value the interaction and the interchange more than you value the idea of winning or scoring points or any of these other things. It says that you're invested in the idea of having the discussion with this person. And I think when you're talking about civility, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about that commitment to being able to have these arguments or these debates and never giving up on it.
And it's talking too. It's how you talk as well as how you listen. I mean, you can't, if you're approaching a conversation where you're engaged in a lecture, you're trying to convince. I'm never going to convert Steve to the light. I gave up on that long time ago, and yet we still have very meaningful, enjoyable arguments and debates. We often get the question in these sessions, well, gosh, how do I talk to somebody who's just so wrong, who just won't admit the facts, won't accept the facts? And, I always say, well, maybe you start by losing that self-righteousness, by assuming that, or by understanding that that person thinks you're as wrong as you think they are. And so lose the smugness, lose the self-righteousness, and enter it with the honest goal, enter a conversation with the honest goal of exchanging ideas and then assessing those ideas. You may discard the other person's views, points in the end, but at least you heard them and made the effort to understand them.
So Rihanna asked if this is something that can only be done one-on-one, or do you think it would work in a small group?
It starts, I think you learn, you start in one-on-one. I mean, you start to learn the process, but it'll work in small groups as well. But I think the first thing you've got to do is, really understand the people you're dealing with, know who they are, and as much as you can about their backgrounds and values.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of a small group is really interesting. But at the core of it has to be that idea of these relationships, right? And so that does start on an individual level. But I could completely see, for instance, a small neighborhood group, for instance, deciding that they wanted to learn more about each other and what they believe and why, as a way to being able to talk about these things, neighborhood interactions. That would make a lot of sense. And the idea, again, of focusing on what is the relationship here, what is the value that we're attaching to this interaction that goes beyond these differences is key. And lots of us have those kinds of relationships in lots of different places: neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, churches, families. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Sounds like we need to plan some of our next civility sessions with small communities and see what they think about themselves. So I have a question from Sherry in a minute, but I did want to just mention a little plug for the Civility Project for those of you who are so excited about this that you want to bring one to your community. We've done 90-minute programs where we have small breakout groups, and they're really productive and people love the experience. And so we put no more than 4 or 5 people in these breakout rooms and give some questions. And they have really profound conversations and want more and more time in it. So just so you know, we've started that a little bit. I mean, it's very, very brief. And it's because we're limited by being, remote. But I think there's a kernel there of people, like you said, wanting to get to know one another that drives those conversations. So we can definitely.
We can also do them in advance. We can also ask people to hold these sessions in advance and then tell us during the session, how it worked out, what they learned.
Absolutely. So we can definitely help you guys with that. So Sherry had a question. She said, what role does trust play in this process?
It's all about that. That's what the process is all about, establishing trust before you get into the difficult discussions, because it is a very dangerous place out there today. I mean, there's a lot of gotcha stuff going on. And so people are afraid to talk. They're afraid to speak in the public square, and oftentimes even afraid to talk amongst acquaintances and friends for fear of saying the wrong thing, for fear of getting a word or a phrase wrong, and suddenly, boom, their lives are ruined. And we've seen that in recent months all over the country. People who thought their minds and positions were in the right place, getting losing their jobs, losing their career because they didn't quite get the phraseology right. So you have to have trust, and you have to cut people a break. You have to understand that people do make mistakes in their speech, and sometimes people don't know, and they simply aren't aware. And so part of the process is helping people become aware of what's okay and what's not okay. But if you're in a conversation where the other person's going to pounce and immediately go on social media and said, Nolan said this or Steve said that, you have to establish those trust. And today it's important to have those kind of ground rules that, this is an open, we want everything out and open so we can debate it and discuss it. I always say that, we ought to be encouraging people to say even the most offensive things so that we can bring it into the public square, debate it, and discredit it, rather than drive it underground where it festers and becomes something dangerous. But trust is essential.
So we have a question from Dylan, and I'd like to preface it by introducing another idea. So you said, be okay with never walking away from the relationship and being able to come back to the conversation. And so what about when it's a relationship that maybe one person isn't really on board with the ground rules, or just holds really difficult beliefs that you just can't get your head around? And with that in mind, Dylan said, what about those that hide or block people on social media who have extreme differing viewpoints, but they do so for their mental and emotional health because of the extra layer of stress that everybody's feeling with the pandemic and other things. So this idea of like, is it ever okay to just say, I really can't talk to you, or this is not someone I can build civility with?
Well, first, Lynn, social media is the worst place to try to have a meaningful civil discussion. I think text and email also are bad places for this. I think the face-to-face conversations work best when you're trying to accomplish this goal. I don't think social media is the platform at all for this.
You know, I do also think that there is, you know, there are times when you're not prepared to do this. You know, there are times when you have to say, I can't do this right now. I can't have this conversation right now because I'm just not prepared to do it in a way that would result in anything productive. And I think that's different from saying, I won't talk about this, or I won't talk to you about this. I think saying, we can't have a discussion about this right now is an important acknowledgement of, you know, your own investment in your beliefs or your thoughts or in your experiences. I mean, and that's the thing that's happening this year, I think, more than anything, is that things are happening to people. Things are happening to people who are close to us. And that experience is, you know, having a real effect on our not just our mental health, but just our ability to interact. And it's okay to say, look, I'm not in a place right now where I can talk about this. But again, I think the larger statement there is, I'm not walking away for good. I'm not saying that I won't engage about this, but I'm saying that you know, I know enough about myself and I know enough about this subject to know that this is just not something I can talk about right now. And I found myself in that space a lot this year, certainly more so than in the past, just unable to engage at that level at a certain time. And I think it's okay to give yourself a break and say, I got to take some time to think this through or to feel some things through, and then I'll be back.
So Andy said that his unfortunate experience is when he approaches this concept, both sides, left and right, start to say, you know, talk to the other side. And so that trust and vulnerability and curiosity need to be in place, but he wants to know, how do we open hearts and minds to just start the discussion? So how do we get people to that starting point?
You know, I think the best approach is to start with questions. I think you can build that process of getting to a lower key, lower tone conversation by asking honest questions, not accusatory questions or threatening questions, but ask the other person about them first. I mean, I think that works in any setting, but particularly in a political discussion. Ask them about their values, their experiences first, and trust that they'll do the same for you. And if they won't, I mean, and not everybody's redeemable.
I mean, and I think, you know, again, starting with something other than the worst, most bitter disagreement that you have is kind of key to this, right? You know, that's not the time to try to build this. But I do think that acknowledging that even the people you have the most bitter disagreements with probably are more complicated and complex than you are giving them credit for is a place to start. And the curiosity about that complexity, right? What is it that makes this person believe these things, and wanting to really know what they are, I think is the way to open the door to trying to say, well, I would like to have a civil exchange with that person. Why don't I start by having a discussion about where all this comes from. Why do you believe these things? But it does take that initial kind of curiosity about things, and that's different from. Nolan talks a lot about not thinking I'm right and I need to get this other person to see it my way, right? I need to educate this person so that they can understand the way I do. I think there's a different motivation here than that, which is curiosity about why somebody thinks differently than you do, and why they've come to a different set of conclusions.
And here's a tip: never sit down across from anybody and the first thing out of your mouth is, "Hey, what do you think about Donald Trump?"
You can start a little more curious, right, than that. So Heather asked, do you think there is more room for actual news versus opinion in our current state? It seems that people are stepping away from social media. So I think Heather's saying reported news versus opinion pieces. What are we seeing out there now? And social media certainly is a lot of opinions. So what do you guys think?
I think you have to, I think it's essential to have some baseline of established facts and data before you start offering your opinion. I think we've moved away to valuing news with opinion more than just, basic news. And I still think, as an old schooler, that there has to be some place where you can go and say, okay, here's the information, unadorned, with opinion, that I can use as a starting point then to go out and listen to other people's opinions to help form my own. But there's got to be a baseline of established facts, I believe, and a place to find them.
Yeah, my concern is not whether there's too much news or too little news or too much opinion. I think one of the virtues of social media and digital distribution is that we can have more. We can have more of everything, and I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. My concern is the blurring of that, right? The conflation of news and opinion, which you see happening way more often than you used to, and that confuses people. There are people who don't get that that there's a difference between news and opinion, or don't get that there's a motivation behind somebody writing something that they pass off as news that's really just an opinion. That's what concerns me, and I think it's also what leads to more of this entrenchment on extreme sides of things, is this idea that that one side's right, the other side's wrong. It certainly gets its power from journalism that refuses to distinguish what it is, and I think we're seeing that. We're seeing more of it, and we're seeing it being done intentionally. That's not an accident or laziness. That's a purposeful way to try to mislead people.
And it's hurting our business. Trust is going way down.
Yeah.
And we hear, but we are up against a pretty tough obstacle, in that people tend to see objectivity in the news that reflects their opinion. And I know that they recognize, our readers and viewers recognize objectivity as perhaps they once did, and that may be our fault too. But, obviously trust in the media is eroding, and I think it has in large part due to the things Steve mentioned.
So how can people discern what is, something that's verified versus something that somebody threw out there and it looks official, but it's not? I think that's one of the big challenges, is that people don't know how to trust or how to choose a news source that is reliable versus one that isn't. I know I see that in the classes I teach all the time, that students just don't know what is a good source and what isn't.
Well, and that's this issue of hierarchy of credibility is very important because you can Google, you can pick any word or any subject and Google it, and you start out, you may have a story from the Detroit News, and then a broadcast from Steve Henderson, and then boom, a blog from Bob in his mother's basement, and it's all right there together. And people don't spend enough time trying to verify the veracity of these news sources. They find one that tells them what they want to hear and say, yeah, that's it. And we're hearing I hear every day from people who say, well, why wasn't this? I read this on, crazytalk.com, and I didn't see it in the Detroit News. Why is it not in the Detroit News? And I said, because it's not true. We have no way of knowing it's not true. And, we get that all the time. So it is vital to understand the credibility of your news sources, and harder to tell today. Once upon a time in the world, to be a journalist required an infrastructure. If you were a newspaper journalist, you had a newspaper behind you and little red boxes on the street, and people knew that there was an establishment, a foundation there. If you were a TV station, you had a studio and satellite dish and an infrastructure that spoke to your credentials. Today, everybody can be a journalist. Anybody can be a journalist, and they can be a journalist today and a short order cook tomorrow, and a political lobbyist the next day. So this idea of credible sources is very, very important, and harder to distinguish. And now you have so many ways to manipulate images and manipulate reality. I sat through a session not long ago where somebody on our staff was showing how you could you could have somebody like Steve Henderson up there speaking, and it's his voice, but somebody else's words coming out of his mouth. And you would swear, well, that's Steve said that. You have no way of knowing whether he actually did or not. That as technology evolves, that is going to become more and more of a threat to our systems.
So we have a few minutes left, and I do encourage you, if you have any lingering questions, to put them in the chat. And I just wonder if you guys can sort of wrap us up with some ideas about, as we're approaching Election Day, I think all sides are, in heightened awareness. People are afraid of what's going to happen, not only with the votes, but then the counting of the votes and afterwards, and all kinds of things. And we're sort of at this heightened level of anxiety. How can we do our best to try to build civility in this time? Are there things that are unique to this election year with the pandemic, with the race relations issues that are rising to the fore, that we can arm ourselves so that we can go forward in a civil state and help others to be there too?
Take the next 5-6 weeks off Twitter might help. It would help your blood pressure and your anxiety level. Man, it's going to be a mess. That's our concern. And we went into this year knowing it was going to be a divisive, angry year. We had no idea it was going to get this bad. I mean, we were just dealing with the election, and then came COVID, which turned out to be another great divider among our people. So, just try to keep your anger down. Try not to hate. I mean, guard against these feelings that I hate this person or that person or this group or that group. And, understand, as Americans, we've been here before. We've been in divisive, dangerous places before. And we've worked through it, and we'll hopefully work through this time. But, don't think this is the apocalypse. It may not be.
So I think one of the things that I have learned this year, or become more aware of, is the understanding that for everybody, these are really difficult and challenging times. I think when we're challenged as individuals, We tend to think that it's really about us, and that's what we're concerned with, and we don't think that necessarily everybody else is grappling with the same things. The pandemic affects everybody. It affects everybody from a health perspective. It affects everybody from an economic perspective. And just pausing, I think, before you react to somebody, to think about what they might be dealing with, what they might be going through, is it's just a really valuable thing to do right now, because I think there is so much reaction to everything, and instant reaction, which often is not as considered, is not as wise as taking your time and thinking things through before you respond or before you do something. I saw a stat, and I've just been repeating it over and over. There's 23 million people in America who have taken part in some way in the Black Lives Matter protests. 23 million. It's the largest social movement in the history of the country. So that means more people than were participating in suffrage, or civil rights, or even the anti-war movement during Vietnam. That's not just Black people, right? 23 million. That's everybody. That is people of all kinds of demographics and backgrounds have stood up and said, you know what, this is not okay. I think that's such a powerful thing to consider when you're thinking about these things, as opposed to just reacting to, well, this is this group, or this is that group, or this is a group of people I don't like or respect or understand. I think there is something organic and granular happening to everybody right now, that's moving them to a different understanding and thinking of things. And I think just pausing to allow space for that, right? To allow that that people are moving and changing the way that they think of these things and deal with them is really really important now in a way that it hasn't been, that I can remember in my adult lifetime.
But the sentiment, Steve, the sentiment has to then evolve into productive conversation and real action. If we're 10 years from now and, we're saying, oh gosh, you remember when, and nothing has changed. And that has always been the challenge. The minds are in the right place. Now, how do we engage in civil conversations that produce action? And so far, we haven't made that turn yet, and that has to happen.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect way to end this session. So all of us can think about how we can take our sentiments and move towards civil conversations. I think if all 60 some people who showed up today do that, we will be in a really powerful place. So I want to thank Sherry Welsh for making this happen. So grateful to Welsh and Associates for sponsoring this, and Delta Dental for making it possible, as always. And thank you to Stephen and Nolan for hatching this idea and bringing it to the world. So
Thank you,
everybody, have a great day.
Appreciate it.